This mission is going to be hard, but you're tough enough, right? Weren't you just telling me that last night, cowboy?
Oh my.
MechAssault 1 is the first game that I ever played on the original Xbox. In fact, the original Xbox is the first console that I ever bought, I guess. There's a bunch of asterisks on that. I traded my N64, PlayStation, and some games into GameStop to cover most of it, and my mom stepped in to cover what I didn't have. I was only 11 at the time, and I was not exactly frugal with the little money that I did have. I guess some things never really change. Still, I was able to afford a refurbished Xbox and MechAssault. Albeit I was a bit disappointed at the time, as I wanted to get Halo, but M-rated game plus having a parent who actually paid attention equals no shooting aliens with fake blood for Dave. So I had to settle for stomping on, shooting, and blowing up human beings in a giant mech. Rated T for teen, everybody! So I popped in the game when I got home and definitely remember enjoying it. Sorry, I know my other videos have much more vivid memories of playing games in them, but I just don't remember playing MechAssault as a kid that well. That's partially why I decided to make this video. Despite having a hazy memory of the game, I still have been on record saying that Microsoft really needs to bring back MechAssault at some point. So I figured, why not revisit the game and its sequel, MechAssault 2 Lone Wolves, to see what made this game series stand out amongst the many IPs that Microsoft was trying out at that time. Two things before we dive into the games. One, I am only reviewing the campaigns of MechAssault 1 and 2, as the Xbox Live servers for these games were shut down years ago. Also, I know this video says the MechAssault series, but I am leaving out the DS game as it wasn't developed by the same team, and I just have no interest in playing it at all. With that said, let's jump in. MechAssault was developed by Day One Studios and published by Microsoft Game Studios in November 2002. Day One Studios had been known as Meyer Glass Interactive up until that point, and had worked on the Axis and Allies series and even did a port of Missile Command to Windows and PlayStation. They have since become part of Wargaming and now work on a little game that I'm sure some of you have heard of. MechAssault is a more action-oriented take on the popular MechWarrior series on PC. Players pilot a giant mech into battle against enemy foot soldiers, tanks, fixed turrets, and of course, enemy mechs. Whereas MechWarrior played from a first-person perspective to give the player the feel of the actual pilot of the mech, MechAssault zooms the camera out to third person. This allows the game to speed up its pace of combat a bit, as the player can easily see everything around them without having to turn the entire mech around. While the game does add new features like this, it also takes away features present in past games, most notably customization. Mechs in MechAssault are pre-made and you can't change out any of the equipment. The game does try and compensate for this in a few ways. First, every available mech has an alternate version with a different name that switches out all of its weapons. This gives the player more options when tackling a mission. For example, let's say you want to use a heavy assault mech for a mission, but you don't necessarily dig the weapons on the Mad Cat. Just switch to the Timberwolf. Same tankiness, better weapons, at least in my opinion. The game also has a power-up system in place, which seems to be their way of substituting for an upgrade system. Destroying specific buildings in the game or other mechs will grant the player a few different power-ups: green to refill health, and blue, yellow, and red power-ups to increase the power of your various weapons. Whereas your base weapons have infinite ammo, these power-ups operate on an ammo system, so you often end up using your weaker weapons to deal with the small fry, and saving the more powerful weapons to deal with the mechs. The game does throw a curveball into the mix by giving your weapons a heat system as well. Use your weapons too much, infinite ammo or not, and they will overheat, leading you to being kinda stuck in the middle of a fight. This all leads to MechAssault feeling like, well, how it's supposed to feel. A mech game designed to be played on a console. It takes away a lot of the tactics and customization of the PC experience to provide something that is supposed to be a fun experience. Nothing really more, but nothing less. Kind of a microcosm of the whole PC versus console thing if you think about it. MechAssault also has a pretty solid story to it, albeit kind of short. The setup is that you're a mech warrior fighting with a mercenary group called the Wolf Dragoons. You've been sent to the planet Helios to investigate a communications blackout. When you arrive, you immediately find yourself under attack by a religious cult called the Ward of Blake, who have taken over planet Helios. After losing all of your squad mates to one of the Ward of Blake's new secret weapons, you set out alone in a single mech to try and stop them. You are aided by Major Natalia, who provides orders and direction for the player, and Lieutenant Foster, a guy who probably should have thought twice before deciding to become a technician.
I've got good news, Major. I was able to use parts from some of the heavy mechs to fix the Cougar Scout mech.
Wait, you took parts from the heavy mechs to fix the light mech?
Well, yeah, I thought that Oh.
Eventually, you corner the Ward of Blake just in time to save the entire planet from being destroyed by some kind of super drill. You even get to take a ride in their secret weapon, the Ragnarok, and wreck house. Overall, the game's campaign has a pretty good pace as it slowly but steadily ramps up the difficulty and intensity while also increasing the mechs at your disposal. Another thing that I like about this game is that it gives you a choice as to which mech you would like to take into battle without any restrictions after unlocking them. For example, you could run one of the later missions in the game with the Cougar Scout mech that you start with in the first mission. Granted, this is not always the best idea, but you can do it, and some missions are even designed to facilitate this with alternate paths for different types of mechs. Overall, MechAssault is a fun and consistent experience from start to end. The combat feels slightly janky at times, but is still totally playable today and has a pretty awesome soundtrack behind it as well. Also, the game still looks decent for an early original Xbox game. As a side note, this is not emulator footage. I captured this on an original Xbox with one of those Hyperkin HDMI cables. Not every 6th gen console game has aged well, so it's nice to see this with such an old game. Day One Studios had a solid game on their hands, but wanted to do more with MechAssault. Games like Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City were setting the industry on fire for their seamless on-foot-to-vehicle gameplay, and with that, Day One Studios saw the opportunity to take the MechAssault formula and create a new sandbox for their players. More was the operative word when it came to MechAssault 2, as the game introduces more varied environments, more mechs, and more perspectives. One of MechAssault 2's defining features is having the ability to get out of the mech and run around the battlefield and possibly steal another mech. Adding to this, the game also includes a new power armor suit that adds just a few feet to your character, but features jump jets, weapons, and a hacking mechanic to disable other suits so you can steal them. Granted, the hacking is kind of the same hacking that you see in most games, this one taking the form of Simon Says. When talking about mech combat solely, the game hasn't changed that much from the previous outing. Mechs still feel quick and responsive, though it is hindered a bit by performance, which I'll get into a bit later. Power-ups also make their return and are awarded in the exact same way, whether it be blowing up certain buildings or by destroying other mechs. The only difference that I noticed was that the camera is a bit closer to the mech, which is neither a positive or negative change really, it's just different. The real changes come in the form of the other non-mech weapons that you have at your disposal. Aside from the power armor that I already mentioned, you also get to drive one of those tanks that you were blowing up by the hundreds in the first game, and you get to fly a helijet called the VTOL, which stands for vertical takeoff and landing. The VTOL can carry both the battle armor and the tank while flying, which would make it very useful if I ever had to use that mechanic in the campaign. MechAssault 2 also introduces new mechs into the mix, like the super awesome looking Nova Cat, the weirdly named but cool looking Blood Asp, and the bipedal Stiletto, which has a flamethrower!
That kids love this one.
Overall, these are all positive changes on paper, but the execution hasn't really held up over time. My issue in particular is with the on-foot sections in this game. Honestly, I would have preferred that they just not done this, and kept it to the battle armor being your most basic form. The on-foot sections are not that fun, as your only weapon is an explosive that kills you if you explode it without clearing the blast zone first. You are very, very squishy in this form, and it isn't hard to get blown to Kingdom Come even if a tank spots you. Ideally, I would want to use this form to bail out of a mech as it's about to explode, so that I can commandeer another one, but that doesn't really work. In that situation, you would either need to run across the battlefield to find a mech that is unoccupied, or run all the way back to wherever you left your battle armor, get back inside so that you can hack a new mech. Either is unrealistic when you're so easily killed by anything on the battlefield that spots you. I appreciate that Day One tried something new here, but it just isn't that fun. Fortunately, the mech combat is still fun, as it was largely untouched from the previous game. It still feels liberating to run around in something like the Cougar. Mechs like the Atlas and the Prometheus still feel weighty and powerful. My only dislike is the new Blood Asp. It's touted as the new powerhouse mech in the series, but honestly, I was barely making it out of most of my fights in this thing. Its main draw is a shoulder-mounted plasma PPC, which doesn't do that much damage compared to how much heat it generates. The mech in general just overheats too much, and it is not that much fun to use. In fact, the less touted Nova Cat is way more fun, and I wish I had had more time with that mech instead. Unfortunately, the game also falters in its campaign as well. The game picks up shortly after the events of MechAssault 1, where you, Major Natalia, and Foster are hiding out on a distant planet while working on the technology for the aforementioned battle armor. After a very quick intro, mechs descend from the sky and begin wreaking havoc across the city. After dispatching the first wave, you run into a new mech warrior named Alara, who offers her ship to help you get back to your homeworld of Northrend, where the other Wolf Dragoons are stationed. A few detours later, and a slew of misfortunes happen to our heroes as we find out that the Wolf Dragoons on Northwind were wiped out, the word of Blake is back, Alara is leaking information to them, and Major Natalia gets captured after she trips. From there, it's a race to Northwind to stop the Word of Blake from raising an army of Ragnarok mechs powered by these data cores that you've been hunting throughout the game. You rescue Natalia, stop the Word of Blake, and smack down a half-finished colossal mech while Korn plays in the background for some reason. I'm serious, that really happens. Compared to the consistent pace of MechAssault 1, MechAssault 2 is way more uneven. Perfect example, the mid-game boss is a giant mechanical spider. Spiders! Get him off me! Get him off me! Get him! It's a cool looking boss, but is pretty easily dispatched, whereas the fight that preceded it was way more difficult, which featured the battle armor trying to hack a Thor mech and then going on to fight many other Thor mechs. Funny enough, a very similar thing happens later in the game. During the mission to rescue Natalia, you're attacked by a bunch of mini spider mechs. Spiders! Spiders! and they are also rather easily dispatched. The previous fight was also much more difficult, where you fought a bunch of tanks and mechs with the Blood Asp, which I have already said is not easy to use. Basically, where the game is supposed to be difficult, it's easy, and where it's supposed to be easier, it's difficult. The campaign of MechAssault 2 is also pretty short, about as short as MechAssault 1, and I'm totally okay with that. Whereas I felt MechAssault 1 began and ended exactly when it should have, I found myself playing MechAssault 2 and thinking, is this over yet? That could also be due to the game's performance, as the frame rate is kinda jumpy at times. Put more than a few mechs on screen, or just use the flamethrower, and the frame rate really dips and hurts gameplay. MechAssault 1 was way more stable by comparison, and that's probably because it didn't push the hardware as much. That leads me to the same conclusion that I come to with most later gen games. MechAssault 2 should have been an Xbox 360 launch title. While you could play it on the 360 with backwards compatibility, I think this game would have benefited from being able to really use the 360 hardware for better frame rates and some improved visuals. After visiting these two games, I can kind of see why the series fell off after the sequel. While I would consider MechAssault 1 to be a staple of the original Xbox's library, MechAssault 2 isn't as easy to recommend. Reviewers at the time were a bit kinder to it, but still docked points for the campaign, and out of the two, I think MechAssault 1 aged better than 2. The not mixed reception, but less positive reception to MechAssault 2, combined with the reported low sales, may have been why Day One Studios either chose or was forced to pursue other projects like Fracture and Fear 3. As of today, it's unknown who actually holds the rights to MechAssault as a series, although BattleTech Universe games are still being made to this day under different names. Microsoft may possibly hold the rights, in which case we may see a return at some point in the future, but for now I'm at least somewhat curious to check out the upcoming MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries from Piranha Games when it releases this December. So I hope you all enjoyed that little dive into the past. What do you think? Did you play the MechAssault games, and if so, what did you think of them? Please leave a comment down below. Also, if you like this video, then please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this from me. Until then, happy gaming, and I'll see you next time. Later.